Get away from my plane, old man! You will get hurt!
The young pilot's voice cracked across the radio like a whip. "Tower, you've got a geezer on foot wandering across your active taxiway in front of my aircraft. I need him removed, immediately." On the cracked asphalt of a small county airfield, an old man in a faded flight jacket kept walking slow and steady, a dented thermos in his scarred left hand. The tower didn't answer right away. When it finally did, the controller's voice was strangely quiet. 6-4 Whiskey. Do me a favour, read me the name embroidered on the back of that jacket. The pilot scoffed, squinted through his windscreen, and read it aloud over the open channel. And then the tower, the whole frequency, went completely silent for 30 seconds. What that name meant, and why grown men would soon be standing at attention on that ramp, is a story you need to hear. Type honour in the comments if you believe respect is earned in places the rest of us never see. Raymond Harlan was 82 years old, and he had crossed that taxiway every morning for the last 11 years. He walked the same line each time, a diagonal path from the chain-link gate by the fuel farm to the sagging green hangar on the far side of the field, and he walked it the way he did everything. Unhurried, deliberate, with a slight hitch in his right hip that made his stride look like a slow metronome. He wore the same jacket in every season. It had been sage green once, decades ago, but the sun had bleached it to the colour of dust, and the cuffs had been rewoven so many times by his late wife's needle that the original fabric was mostly memory. The leather name patch over the heart had cracked and curled at the corners. Most people at Carroll County Airfield had stopped noticing him years ago, the way you stop noticing a fence post or a windsock. He was just the old man with the thermos, the old man who fed the barn cats behind the maintenance shop, the old man who kept a small square of garden inexplicably in the strip of grass between Taxiway Alpha and the old beacon tower, a patch of white gravel and marigolds that he tended on his knees, slowly every single morning, rain or heat or frost. If anyone had looked closely, and no one ever did, they might have wondered about his left hand, where the tops of 2 fingers were gone, the skin across the knuckles glassy and pale, the way old burn scars get. They might have noticed that when an aircraft passed overhead, low on final, he never looked up like the airport kids did, with hunger and wonder. He looked up the way a man checks on something he is responsible for, and they might have noticed the small square of cloth he carried in his breast pocket, soft and yellowed, which he touched sometimes, briefly, with 2 fingers, the way other men touch a crucifix. But nobody looked closely at Ray Harlan. Nobody had looked closely in 50 years, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He came, he tended the marigolds, he drank his coffee on the bench outside the green hangar, and he went home. A quiet man with a quiet routine at the quietest airfield in the county. But on the 3rd Tuesday of June, a white twin-engine Cessna with a charter company's logo on the tail would touch down at Carroll County at 7:42 in the morning, 6 minutes behind schedule, flown by a young man having the worst week of his career, and by noon that same day, the quietest airfield in the county would fall so silent that people would remember exactly where they were standing when it happened. Carroll County Airfield was the kind of place aviation had mostly forgotten. 1 runway, 4,000 feet of patched asphalt shimmering in the early heat, a self-serve fuel island, a flight school with 2 tired Cessna 152s and an instructor who doubled as the mechanic. The morning smelled of cut grass and avgas, and the only sounds were cicadas, the snap of the windsock finding a new direction, and the tick of cooling engines. The tower was a squat box on stilts at midfield, technically a non-federal contract tower, staffed by exactly 2 controllers who alternated shifts. That morning it was Dale Kowalski's turn, 50 years old, 22 of those years spent wearing an Air Force headset at bases whose names he didn't talk much about, the kind of controller who could read an engine by sound alone and a pilot by the tone of his first transmission. Dale liked Carroll County because nothing ever happened there. He drank his coffee black, kept a photo of his father taped to the console, and worked traffic that consisted mostly of student pilots butchering their radio calls and crop dusters, who barely made any. Down on the ramp, 19-year-old Brie Castillo was dragging a fuel hose across the apron, her 3rd week on the job as a line technician, still nervous around propellers, still secretly thrilled every time a transient aircraft called in. She had seen the old man cross the field that morning, same as always, and she had done what most people did. Smiled a little, the polite, dismissive smile you give something harmless and slow. Somebody's grandpa, she figured. Somebody who probably wandered over from the retirement community off Route 9. She didn't know his name. Almost nobody did. The fuel order on her clipboard said a Cessna 414 was inbound from the city, a charter positioning flight, quick turn, pilot in a hurry. Bree checked her watch and squinted at the horizon for the landing light. 300 feet above the highway, descending through the morning haze, that 414's pilot was gripping his yoke harder than he needed to. Jaw tight, a phone full of unread messages from his chief pilot burning in his flight bag. He believed the worst thing waiting for him at Carroll County was a slow fuel pump. He had no idea that the next radio call he made would follow him for the rest of his life. His name was Tyler Brandt. 29 years old, 1,400 hours, 11 months into his first real charter job, and 3 days removed from a check ride that had not gone well. The company had him on a probationary review. His chief pilot's last words before this trip had been, "No more delays, Brandt, none." So when the fuel truck at his departure airport had been slow, and the headwinds had been worse than forecast, and now the self-serve pump at this nowhere county strip looked like it predated the moon landing, something in Tyler's chest had wound itself tight as a clock spring. He landed hard, flat, impatient. He taxied fast off the runway, fast enough that Bree took an instinctive step back from the fuel island. And that was when he saw him, an old man, on foot, walking, strolling, diagonally across taxiway Alpha, directly across the path of his aircraft, carrying a thermos like he was headed to a park bench. Tyler stood on the brakes. The Cessna rocked on its nose strut. The old man did not flinch, did not hurry, did not even appear to register the 8,000 pounds of aluminum idling 40 feet away from him. He simply kept walking his slow, hitching metronome walk as if the taxiway belonged to him. Tyler keyed the radio, and every ounce of 3 bad days went out over the frequency with his voice. Tower 464 Whiskey. You want to tell me why there's a pedestrian on your active taxiway? I've got some geezer on foot wandering around in front of my prop. I need him removed. Immediately. I don't have time for this. On the open channel, his voice carried to every headset on the field, the flight school office, the crop duster holding short, the maintenance shop radio on the workbench. Bree heard it from the fuel island, and felt her face go hot with second-hand embarrassment. Out on the taxiway, Ray Harland finally stopped. He turned his head, slowly, and looked at the white Cessna and the young man silhouetted behind its windscreen. He did not look startled. He did not look afraid. He looked at Tyler Brandt the way a man looks at weather, something that arrives, makes noise, and passes. Then he gave the smallest nod, almost courteous, and continued walking. To Tyler, it read as mockery. He keyed the mic again, harder this time. "Tower, did you copy? I said I need this individual off the movement area now. Is anybody awake up there, or do I need to call the FSDO myself? Because I will. This is a safety violation, and I'm documenting it." Up in the tower cab, Dale Kowalski set down his coffee without taking his eyes off the taxiway. He had heard 10,000 angry pilots in his career. This one didn't worry him. What got his attention was the old man, because Dale was new enough at Carroll County, 8 months on the job, that he had never actually paid attention to the morning walker everyone else treated like part of the landscape. The previous controller had mentioned him once with a shrug. Harmless, been crossing forever, manager lets it slide, don't worry about it. Dale keyed up, calm and professional. 464 Whiskey, Roger. Hold position. The pedestrian is known to the field. He'll be clear of your path in about 30 seconds. It was the wrong thing to say to a man 3 days from losing his job. Known to the field? Known to the field? Tyler's voice jumped half an octave. I don't care if he's the mayor. You've got an unauthorized person on an active surface and a revenue aircraft burning fuel, because Grandpa wants to take a walk. I'm putting this in a report. What's your operating initials? What's his name? Give me his name. By now the ramp had an audience. The flight school instructor had stepped out onto the porch with 2 students. The crop duster pilot, holding short of the runway, had turned in his seat to watch. Bree stood frozen by the fuel truck, hose in hand, looking between the idling Cessna and the old man, who had nearly finished his crossing and was now stepping, unhurried, off the asphalt and onto the grass beside his little square of marigolds. He knelt, slowly, one hand braced on his knee, and began pulling weeds as if nothing whatsoever was happening behind him. Tyler watched him do it and felt something snap. He set the parking brake, left the engines running, and reached for his door latch. Up in the tower, Dale Kowalski watched the pilot's door swing open, and he leaned toward the glass, and for the first time he really looked at the old man through his binoculars, at the jacket, at the posture, at the faded patch on the back, and 1,100 miles of Dale's memory began very quietly to stir. Ray Harlan heard the young man's shoes hit the pavement behind him. He heard the engine still turning, which told him the pilot was angry enough to leave a running aircraft, which told him most of what he needed to know. He kept weeding. There was a rhythm to it that steadied him, the same rhythm there had been for 11 years, ever since he'd buried Marjorie and discovered that mornings were the hardest part. The silence of the kitchen, the second coffee cup he kept taking down from the cabinet by mistake. The garden had started as a place to put his hands. It had become something else. Beneath the marigolds set flush in the white gravel was a small bronze plate the size of a postcard. Most people assumed it marked a pet, if they noticed it at all. It read only, "For the ones who waited in the trees." Ray touched the soil around the flowers and let the young man's footsteps come. He was not offended. It took a great deal more than a stranger's temper to offend him. That capacity had been burned out of him a long time ago, somewhere over a green country he still visited in his sleep. People had asked him, in the years after, why he never talked about any of it, and he'd never found a way to explain that the silence wasn't modesty. It was arithmetic. The things he'd done had been paid for by men who couldn't tell their own stories anymore, and it had always seemed obscene to spend their currency on dinner party admiration. Marjorie had understood without being told. She'd sewn the call sign onto the back of the jacket herself in 1973, the week his discharge came through, working by lamplight at the kitchen table. He'd asked her why, since no one would ever know what it meant. She'd bitten off the thread and said, "I'll know, and someday, somebody who matters will read it." He had worn it every day since she died. It was the closest thing he had to holding her hand. In the breast pocket of the jacket, against his heart, the little square of parachute silk sat where it always sat. 41 initials were inked on it, faded brown, in his own careful hand. He could feel it there the way you feel a key in your pocket, a small weight that answers the question of who you are. "Hey, hey, I'm talking to you." The voice was close now, raw with frustration. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? Do you even know where you are? This is an airport. Airport. You can't just—" The young man stopped, because the old man had turned his head and was looking up at him from his knees, and there was something in the old man's eyes that didn't match the rest of him. The face was 82 years old, the eyes were not. They were calm in a way that wasn't passive. Calm the way deep water is calm, with all that implies about what's underneath. "Son," Ray said quietly, "your right engine's running rough on one mag. Number 5 plug most likely. Been hearing it since you turned off the runway." Then he went back to his weeding. And Tyler Brandt stood there on the grass with his mouth open, because the old man was right, and Tyler knew he was right, and that made everything worse. Tyler did what people do when they're embarrassed and can't admit it. He got louder. He stalked back to his aircraft, climbed in, and lit up the frequency again. "Tower 464 Whiskey. I want this on tape. Unauthorized pedestrian on the movement area, interfering with operations, and now I've got a delay on a Part 135 positioning leg. I want his name for my report, and I want him escorted off this field. He's wearing some kind of costume jacket and lecturing me about my own aircraft. The guy's clearly confused. Somebody needs to come get their geezer." The word hung on the open channel. At the flight school, the instructor winced. In the maintenance shop, an old mechanic named Pruitt set down his wrench and walked to the window. Up in the tower, Dale Kowalski had the binoculars pressed to his eyes, and his coffee had gone cold, and his heart was doing something strange, because the patch on the back of that faded jacket was hand-embroidered, the way unit wives used to do it, and the threads had broken in places. But at 300 feet through good glass, the letters were still legible, and Dale had read them twice now, and both times his brain had refused the information like a body rejecting a transplant. It wasn't possible. It was a coincidence. An old surplus jacket, a flea market find. It had to be. Because Dale Kowalski had heard those words before, once, 26 years ago, at a controller's retirement dinner at Davis Monthan, from an old radar man who'd worked the secret frequencies out of Thailand, who had gone quiet and glassy after his third drink and said, "You boys work traffic. We worked ghosts, and one ghost in particular." Dale's hands were not quite steady as he keyed the transmitter. He kept his voice flat, regulation flat, the flatness a controller learns to wear over anything. 464 Whiskey Tower. Before you file that report, do me a favour. You're closest. Read me the name embroidered on the back of the gentleman's jacket. Read it exactly. A pause. A confused, irritated click of the mic. You're kidding me. Read it, please. Exactly as written. And Tyler Brandt, sitting in his idling Cessna, rolled his eyes, leaned toward the windscreen, squinted at the old man kneeling in the marigolds 40 feet away, and read aloud, over the open channel into every headset on the field, 11 words that were about to stop the morning dead. It says... Tyler squinted. The sun was on the threads. The old man, as if he knew, straightened slightly on his knees, and the faded letters caught the light. It says Harlan, our Harlan, and under that it says Vandal 3-1, and there's it looks like a playing card. A jack of spades with wings on it. There. Happy? Some old costume? The frequency went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Tyler waited for the comeback, the bureaucratic drone, the next move in the argument he was certain he was winning. It didn't come. 5 seconds. 10. He checked his radio stack, convinced he'd blown a breaker. 15 seconds. The crop duster holding short keyed up hesitantly. Tower, Ag Truck 7-3 still holding, and got nothing. 20 seconds. At the fuel island, Bree watched the tower cab and saw, through the green glass, the silhouette of the controller standing absolutely motionless, with one hand pressed flat against the window, like a man steadying himself. 30 seconds of dead air on an active frequency is a lifetime. It is long enough for every pilot listening to understand that something has happened, even if they don't know what. When Dale Kowalski's voice finally came back, it did not sound like a controller's voice anymore. It sounded careful, the way you carry something that can break. 464 Whiskey. Shut down your engines. Shut down and hold position. Do not move that aircraft. Tyler blinked. Tower, I've got a schedule. Shut it down, son. Not regulation phrasing. Not even close. Your schedule's the least important thing on this field right now. And then, before Tyler could answer, the tower frequency clicked again, and Dale said something no one on the field understood yet, his voice low and rough at the edges. And nobody talks to that man on my field like that again. Up in the cab, Dale was already reaching for his cell phone with a shaking hand. He scrolled to a number he called every Sunday, a number belonging to a 78-year-old man 4 counties away who still woke at dawn, out of habits formed in a prison camp's shadow. His father answered on the second ring. Dad, Dale said, and his voice broke on the word. Dad, you need to drive to Carroll County, right now. He's here. He's been here the whole time. Tyler Brandt did not shut down. Pride is a poor co-pilot, and his was flying the airplane now. He kept the engines turning at idle and switched to his cell phone instead, dialing his charter company's operations desk, pacing his words for maximum grievance. Yeah, it's Brandt. I'm stuck at Carroll County. No, listen. The tower here is protecting some local character who walks on the taxiways, and now the controller's having some kind of episode and ordered me to shut down. I want it logged that this delay is not on me. I want the airport manager's name. I'm telling you, this place is a circus. Across the ramp, the audience was growing. Pruitt the mechanic had come out of his shop, wiping his hands on a rag, and he wasn't watching the Cessna. He was watching the old man with an odd expression, like a man rereading a page he'd skimmed for years. The flight school students had their phones out. The crop duster had given up on departing, shut down right there in the run-up area, and climbed out to lean against his wing. Scanner traffic travels fast in a small county. A retired sheriff's deputy who monitored the airport frequency from his porch had already made 2 phone calls, and somewhere in town the VFW Post's morning coffee group went suddenly quiet around a speakerphone. Bree drifted closer to the grass strip, drawn by something she couldn't name, and that was when the old man spoke to her, the first time she'd ever heard his voice. "Don't let your hose kink like that, miss," he said gently, nodding toward the fuel island. "Bends the inner liner, costs your boss money." Then he smiled at her, and the smile was so unexpectedly kind, so completely without anger at anything happening around him, that Bree felt her throat tighten, and didn't know why. Tyler ended his call and keyed the radio one more time, with the special confidence of a man holding a shovel at the bottom of a hole. "Tower, I've notified my company, and I'll be notifying the FSDO. I hope your local mascot is worth your certificate. Now are you going to move the geezer? Or am I? In the tower, Dale Kowalski looked down at the phone in his hand, at the text his father had just sent back, 3 words, no punctuation. And then out at the white Cessna, and he made a decision that had nothing to do with any regulation ever written. The text read, "Coming, don't let him leave." Dale came down from the tower. Controllers do not leave the cab mid-shift. He called his off-duty partner, told him to get in early, and was crossing the ramp 4 minutes later, headset still around his neck, walking with the stiff urgency of a man who has rehearsed something his whole life without ever expecting to perform it. He went past the Cessna without a glance. He stopped at the edge of the grass, 10 feet from the kneeling old man, and he stood there for a moment like a parishioner at a rail. "Sir," Dale said, "Mr. Harlan." The old man looked up, unhurried as ever, and studied him. "You'd be the new tower man, Kowalski." A pause, and something flickered across the old eyes. The name landing. "Kowalski," Ray said again, slower. Dale's jaw was working. "My father is Stanley Kowalski, sir. Staff Sergeant Stanley Kowalski. He was a backseater on a recce flight that went down west of the river in March of 1970. The old man went very still. The trowel stopped in the soil. "Grid Echo 5, Ray said quietly. It was not a question. By now, Tyler had climbed out of his aircraft again, partly fury, partly something newer and colder beginning to crawl up his spine, and he arrived in time to hear Dale turn to him with eyes like wet glass. "You want to know who you've been screaming at, son? You want a name for your report?" Dale's voice rose so the whole ramp could hear it. 2 students and a mechanic and a fueler and a crop duster, all of them frozen. There was a call sign in Southeast Asia that wasn't assigned to a squadron. It was assigned to a mission, a classified rescue mission, flying unmarked aircraft into places we weren't supposed to be, going in low and alone after downed aircrews when nobody else was allowed to come. The men who flew under that call sign didn't exist on paper. Their records were sealed for almost 30 years. 3 of them are still alive today. 3 in the whole world. He pointed at the faded jacket. "That call sign was Vandal 3-1, and you just ordered him off his own taxiway." Tyler's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And Ray Harlan, kneeling in his marigolds, said the only thing he would say about it. "Wasn't ever my taxiway, Dale. I just look after the flowers." The pickup truck arrived 51 minutes later, riding the shoulder of Route 9 with its hazards flashing, and the man who climbed out of it was 78 years old and had not waited for the engine to stop turning. Stanley Kowalski came through the airport gate at a half-run that his knees would make him pay for later, scanning the ramp wildly, past the Cessna, past the crowd that had somehow grown to 30 people, past his own son, until he found the figure in the faded jacket standing now by the little garden. And Stanley stopped. 20 feet away, he just stopped, as if he'd hit the end of a tether, and the 2 old men looked at each other across the grass for a long, long moment while the entire airfield held its breath. "March 11th, Stanley said finally, and his voice came out shredded. 1970. We were down in the trees for 2 days and a night. They were sweeping the ridge for us. We could hear the dogs." He took a step. Everybody else got called off. Weather was below minimums, the threat ring was hot, the whole package went home, and then at first light there's this one airplane. One. Coming up the valley below the fog, below the ridgeline, taking fire the whole way, and this voice comes up on my survival radio, calm as a Sunday drive, and says... Stanley's face collapsed and he had to stop, and the old man by the garden finished it for him, softly, in the same voice he'd used to discuss spark plugs. "Good morning. Gentlemen, this is Vandal 3-1. Heard you boys needed a ride." Stanley made a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. "He came in 3 times. 3 times. They hit him twice and he came back anyway. He pulled 4 of us out of a hole in the jungle the size of a tennis court, and the airplane was burning when it crossed the fence, and he pulled the man behind me out of the wreck with his bare hands." Stanley pointed, shaking, at the old man's scarred left hand. The missing fingertips, the glassy burn-tight skin. That's where his fingers went, getting my crew out of a fire. He turned to the crowd, to Tyler, to all of them. They gave him the Air Force Cross in a closed room with 11 people present, and then they classified it, and he went home and never told a soul. 41 men. Over 4 years, that call sign brought home 41 men. On the grass, Ray Harlan reached into his breast pocket with 2 ruined fingers and took out the small yellowed square of parachute silk. 41 sets of initials, inked in careful brown rows. Bree, standing closest, would say later that her legs nearly went out from under her when Stanley Kowalski pulled out his wallet, hands trembling, and unfolded from behind his driver's license a matching square of the same silk, carried every day for 56 years, with one set of initials on it, RH. And as the two halves of that old parachute met in the middle of the grass for the first time in half a century, nobody on that ramp noticed the young pilot backing slowly away from his airplane, or could have guessed what he was about to do in front of all of them. What Tyler Brandt did was this. He walked to the middle of the taxiway, the exact spot where the old man had been walking when he'd called him a geezer over an open frequency. And he stood there for a second with his shoulders heaving, a young man watching the wreckage of his own certainty burn. Then he took off his sunglasses, folded them into his shirt pocket, turned to face Ray Harlan and drew himself up straight. Tyler had never served. He didn't know the customs, so he did the only thing he could think of. He stood at the best attention a civilian can manage, spine rigid, chin level, arms locked at his sides, and he said, loud enough for the whole field to hear, with his voice cracking apart on every other word, "Sir, my name is Tyler Brandt. I am the pilot who disrespected you this morning on the radio in front of everyone. There's no excuse. I was wrong and I'm ashamed, and I will be ashamed of it for a long time. I'm sorry, sir." The silence that followed had weight. Pruitt, the mechanic, 66 years old, was crying openly into his shop rag and not bothering to hide it. The crop duster had removed his hat. One of the flight students whispered, "Oh my God," and lowered her phone, suddenly certain that some things shouldn't be filmed. And Ray Harlan, Vandal 3-1, holder of the Air Force Cross, one of 3 living men ever to carry the call sign, crossed the grass to the boy with his slow metronome walk and stood in front of him and looked at him for a long moment with those deep water eyes. "You left your engines running when you got out earlier," Ray said. "Don't ever do that again. Aircraft deserve respect." A beat. "So do people. You've got the first one down. You just learnt the second. That makes you ahead of most." Then he extended his scarred left hand, the burned one, the one with the missing fingertips, the hand that had pulled a burning man out of a wreck in 1970, and Tyler Brandt shook it like it was made of something holy, and the ramp at Carroll County Airfield broke into the kind of applause that starts ragged and ends thunderous, and somewhere in the middle of it, Stanley Kowalski stepped forward, came to attention with 56 years of practiced precision, and rendered a salute so sharp it could have cut the morning in half. Every soul on that field who had ever worn a uniform followed him. Dale, Pruitt, the retired deputy at the fence, and Ray Harlan, 82 years old, straightened out of his stoop until the years fell off him like water, and returned it. The hours after that were strange and gentle, the way air feels after a storm front passes. Nobody quite wanted to leave. The flight school instructor brought out folding chairs. Bree made a pot of coffee in the FBO and carried a cup to Ray with both hands like an offering, and when he thanked her by name, he had read her name tag, of course. He read everything. She had to turn away and pretend to check the fuel truck. Stanley and Ray sat on the bench outside the green hangar, knee to knee, and talked in low voices for 2 hours, and no one dared go near except Dale, who stood a respectful distance behind his father like an honour guard, and never once stopped having to wipe his eyes. The crowd learned things in fragments that afternoon, passed from person to person in murmurs, that the green hangar held a half-restored Stearman that Ray had been quietly rebuilding for years, that the marigold garden with the small bronze plate sat in the exact spot where, in 1971, a returning rescue aircraft had finally shut down its engine after the war's longest day, and that the plate's inscription, "For the ones who waited in the trees," was for the men he brought home, and the ones he couldn't. There were 7 of those. Ray could recite their names slower and more carefully than his own. Late in the afternoon, the airport manager, who had spent 11 years signing off on the old Walker as a harmless local quirk without ever once asking his name, came out to the bench, hat literally in hand, and started an apology he couldn't finish. Ray waved it off before the second sentence. "You let an old man keep a garden on your field for 11 years and never charged him rent," Ray said. "Way I count it, I owe you." That was the thing people kept colliding with all day. He would not accept their guilt. He handed every apology back gently, like returning a tool someone had dropped. Tyler Brandt's chief pilot called him 4 times that afternoon. Tyler let it ring. When he finally answered, standing alone by the fuel island, he didn't defend himself, didn't spin it. He said, I'll accept whatever the company decides. But before you decide, there's something I need to tell you about what happened here today, and I need you to actually listen." And his chief pilot, who had been ready to fire him, listened to a young man describe his own worst moment with unflinching honesty for 10 straight minutes, and then was quiet for a while, and then said, "Brant, that's the first time you've ever sounded like a captain." The Cessna's right engine, for the record, had a fouled number 5 plug. Pruitt fixed it for free while Tyler watched and handed him tools. But before any of that, before the coffee and the murmurs and the phone call, there had been one more moment on the grass, one almost nobody caught. Bree caught it, and what she saw pass between the old man and the kneeling Stanley Kowalski would change the entire direction of her life. What Bree saw was this. Stanley Kowalski, before he sat on the bench, had lowered himself onto both knees in the grass beside the marigold garden, an old man kneeling with difficulty, waving off his son's help, and read the bronze plate and bowed his head over it. And Ray Harlan had knelt down next to him, shoulder to shoulder, 2 men in their final season, and Ray had taken the silk square from his pocket and pointed to 7 sets of initials, one at a time, and said each name out loud, and Stanley had repeated each one back like a response in a liturgy. They were not mourning exactly, they were keeping watch. Bree, 19 years old, 3 weeks into a job she'd taken for gas money, stood by a fuel truck and understood with sudden total clarity that she was looking at what an entire life of quiet duty actually looks like when it's finished being quiet. She enrolled in the flight school at Carroll County 11 days later. Ray paid her first month's instruction without telling her. She found out from the instructor in August and cried in the supply closet. The story moved through the aviation world the way these stories do. First the county paper, then a veterans page, then everywhere. The Air Force, prodded by a congressman's office and an avalanche of letters, reviewed the sealed file. That October, at a ceremony Ray tried twice to get out of attending, the Air Force Cross citation was read aloud in public for the first time in 54 years in the Carroll County hangar, with the half-restored Stearman draped in bunting and 300 people on folding chairs. The 2 other living Vandal pilots flew in. One came from Arizona on an airline, the other 90 landed his own Bonanza on runway 27 and taxied in to applause. Tyler Brant was there, in the 3rd row, having driven 4 hours. He came back the next month too, and the month after that, and somewhere along the way it stopped being penance and became Saturdays. A young charter pilot in coveralls, learning fabric work on a Stearman wing, listening. The county commission voted in November to rename the field. Ray fought it, lost and pretended to be annoyed. The new sign went up in spring, Carroll County Airfield, Harlan Field. Underneath, smaller, home of Vandal 31. Some changes were smaller than a sign and mattered more. Dale Kowalski took down the generic airport diagram taped beside his console and replaced it with 2 photographs. His father in 1969, lean and grinning beside a reconnaissance aircraft, and a new one. Stanley and Ray on the bench outside the green hangar squinting into the sun, neither man smiling for the camera and both somehow smiling anyway. Stanley started driving over on Sundays. He and Ray would walk the field together at dawn, 2 slow silhouettes against the runway lights, and the Sunday student pilots learned to look for them, the way sailors look for a lighthouse. Pruitt, the mechanic, it turned out, had served 2 tours as a crew chief and had spent 11 years working 40 feet from a man he'd never once asked about. He atoned for it by refusing permanently to let Ray pay for so much as a cotter pin. And an unwritten rule settled over the field, never voted on, never posted, enforced by everyone. When the old man crossed the taxiway each morning, traffic held. Not because anyone ordered it, because it was his walk, and they knew where it ended, and what was planted there. Visiting pilots would key up confused. Tower? Is that a pedestrian on Alpha? And Dale would answer in a voice that closed all discussion. Affirmative. That's Vandal 3-1. He has the right of way at this field for life. You can shut down and wait, or you can consider it an honour. Most folks pick the second one. Most folks did. Some shut down anyway, climbed out, and stood by their wings until he'd passed, and Ray would lift the dented thermos an inch in acknowledgement, which the regulars came to call getting waved off by the man himself, and which more than one professional pilot has described, without embarrassment, as the proudest moment of their flying career. Bree soloed the following June, almost a year to the day after the morning everything changed. Ray stood at the fence for all three of her landings. When she taxied in, shaking and grinning, he was waiting with a pair of scissors for her shirt tail, and with something else folded in his scarred left hand. A small square of parachute silk cut from the last unmarked corner of the piece he'd carried for 56 years. 41 names on mine, he told her, while the whole flight school watched and held its breath. This piece is blank on purpose. You fill yours with the people you help. That's the whole job, miss. The flying's just how you get to them. Tyler Brandt made captain the following year. The day his upgrade letter came through, he didn't post it anywhere or call his friends first. He drove to Harlan Field, found Ray sanding a wing rib in the green hangar, and laid the letter on the workbench without a word. Ray read it through, taking his time, then looked up over his glasses. "Left seat," Ray said. "More people trusting you now. You ready to deserve that?" Tyler said he was trying to be. Ray nodded slowly and went back to sanding, and just when Tyler thought that was all, the old man spoke again quietly to the wing rib. "Man yelled at me on a radio once. Came back 100 Saturdays to make it right. I'd fly with him." Tyler stood in that hangar with his upgrade letter and wept like a child, and Ray let him, and neither of them ever mentioned it again. It became the story pilots told each other in crew rooms and hangars, far from Carroll County, usually wrong in the details the way good stories get, but always right in the bones. A young pilot in a hurry, an old man walking slow, a name on a jacket read out loud by the one person on the field who didn't know what it meant, heard by the one person who did. 30 seconds of silence on an open frequency. People who were there say the strangest part wasn't the reveal, or the salute, or even the two halves of parachute silk meeting in the grass after 56 years. The strangest part was realizing how close they'd all come to never knowing, that the most decorated man any of them would ever meet had been walking past them every single morning for 11 years, carrying his thermos and his 41 names, asking for nothing while they looked straight through him. How many others are we looking through right now? The man behind you at the pharmacy, the woman feeding pigeons outside the library, the slow old fellow holding up the line. You cannot see a life from the outside of it. Honor isn't loud. It doesn't introduce itself. It kneels in a gravel garden at the edge of a county airfield and pulls weeds for the ones who waited in the trees. Ray Harlan still crosses the taxiway every morning, a little slower now. The traffic still holds. And on quiet days, if you're parked on the ramp at Harlan Field with your engine shut down and your window open, you can watch an entire airport stand still for one old man and a thermos and understand, finally, that it isn't a delay at all. It's a privilege. If this story moved you, type honor in the comments for Ray, for Stanley, and for the 41 names on a square of parachute silk. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we tell the stories of heroes the world walked past and the moments the world finally stopped to look. Some debts can't be repaid, but they can be remembered. Thank you for remembering with us.